Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I like to compare what Rishi Sunak said about his Stop the Boats pledge in January when he initially announced it, and this week as the Prime Minister who said no tricks seems to be playing a few tricks. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So Rishi Sunak appears to have been trying to wriggle out of his Stop the Boats pledge again. Before I go over what he's been saying this week, let's remind ourselves of what he said back in January. His Stop the Boats pledge was explained as passing new laws to stop the small boat crossings. Now, what the pledge was precisely, it was worthless without the results, isn't it? You know, you've got to have success criteria. He said he was going to pass legislation to stop the boats. That was the actual pledge. And you could say, okay, well, he's now passed the legislation. That is passed. So is he going to claim that he's met his pledge because he passed the legislation? No, that would be ridiculous. He's the leader of not only the largest party in Parliament, but one with a sizable majority. It's easy for him to pass legislation. And in fact, he's not claiming that he's met his pledge because he knows the real value of the pledge was in stopping the small boat channel crossings. He knows that it is the results that determine whether the pledge has been met, not the process. And that's not my opinion. It's what Sunak said in January. He said, and I quote, "Those are the people's priorities. They are your government's priorities, and we will either have achieved them or not. No tricks, no ambiguity. We're either delivering for you or we're not. So I ask you to judge us on the effort we put in and the results we achieve." Now, with the exception of the pledge on halving inflation, which was clearly stated as being this year, Sunak didn't actually give a time frame to deliver his other pledges, which is fine. So he's suggesting, okay, it's going to take more than a year. Fine. So you could argue he's got more leeway in delivering those. We don't have to get to the end of the year and judge those. That's fine. And that includes the Stop the Boats pledge. However, there are a couple of things which we might reasonably expect. First, that progress be made now that this dreadful legislation has actually passed. His pledge specified that the legislation would be what leads to the channel crossings being stopped. Not part of a package, not, oh, the first step in a load of things that's going to take us 10 years. No. This was the thing that was going to do it. You know, it wasn't part of the pledge. It was the pledge. It was the whole pledge. Pass this legislation to stop the boats. As a result, people who went along with it, who supported the government in doing it, should reasonably expect that the impact of that legislation, now that it is in force, it's there now, will be to see a decline in numbers and a clear extrapolation possible for when the boats will be stopped. Instead, the news are reporting record numbers of crossings, and this is all since the legislation was passed, remember. Second, given that Sunak himself said to judge him on the results, no tricks, no ambiguity, whenever he thinks the time has arrived to judge him on those results cannot possibly be later than the general election. So now let's turn to what Sunak is saying now. So yesterday, actually first, what he didn't say. He was asked yesterday if the crossings will have stopped by the time the general election takes place. Now, it's not just that he refused to answer. He did refuse to answer. But, I mean, being fair, you can't actually state that the crossings will stop altogether. Obviously, no politician is going to fall into that trap. That'd be ridiculous. But he could have said something like, the crossings will be below 1% of their current levels. That way, he's not falling into a trap whereby, you know, the boats have stopped and then one political activist gets in a boat in France and crosses the channel just to make him look silly. But you get the point across that the historically large numbers that we see now will be no more. But he didn't even do that. He refused even to say what we could expect by the general election. You know, he said, judge us on the results. Well, what are the results that we can judge you on? You know, why wouldn't he just say what his success criteria are? In his view, I mean, we can make up our own minds. But in his view, the legislation's passed and is in force. That's the thing you said that would deal with it. So why can't we expect you to have dealt with it? Surely we should expect those results that he told us to judge him on to be evident. He then said that the problem cannot be solved overnight. Now, I don't think anyone's suggesting it could. But Sunak came up with the pledge and he did say he would stop the boats. Nobody forced him to adopt that pledge. It was not the pledge of a previous administration that he was honour bound to carry forward. And despite claiming that they were the people's priorities, The people were never actually consulted on it. There was no vote or anything. Oh, here's 100 priorities. Which ones do you want us to have as our top 5? There was none of that. So it was his pledge. He chose it. He chose the wording. And he chose to tell voters to judge him on the results. And when is the only time that the public get to judge a government on their results? In a general election. So it's really this simple. It doesn't matter, you know, how much he prevaricates on when the time will be. The time will be the general election. And by the general election, he has either diminished the number of crossings to the level where they're not really worth mentioning, or he has failed to deliver the results. And the time to judge it is absolutely the general election date, which he also gets to choose, by the way. He can decide whether that general election is this autumn, next spring, next summer, next autumn, next winter if necessary, assuming his party doesn't implode for some reason before then. Also, saying that the problem can't be solved overnight is ridiculous. If, for example, Sunak calls the election in autumn 2024, where there is a reasonable chance, he'll have been Prime Minister for 2 full years. 2 years is not overnight. And as I already said, Sunak chose the pledge. If he didn't think it would be achieved for the general election, he should not have adopted it as one of his urgent, because that's what these were. He wasn't saying these are the 5 things we're working on. He's actually made it clear in January, just as now. We're actually working on lots of things. These are our top 5 urgent priorities. Those are the ones he urged the public to judge him by. Sunak also said he was pleased that the numbers are down so far on last year, but this will not help him. First of all, the number of crossings is very dependent on the weather, for obvious reasons, with the weather having been, you know, arguably less suitable for significant periods this year compared to last. Of course, the numbers are going to be lower. But although they are lower, they are only just lower. They are still way higher than in previous years. Way higher. Assuming the figures remain lower than in 2022 all the way through the rest of this year, I don't think Sunak is going to get away with saying come the election, vote for me. I said I'd stop the boats and I stopped 2% of them. And also, regardless of whether or not the numbers remain lower this year than last, if he has the general election next year, at any time next year, utterly irrelevant what this year's results are. If he goes to the polls next May, if he goes to the polls next October, November, doesn't matter. He will be judged on the figures of that year so far. And if they go up again in 2024, and especially if they go for an autumn election, and they'll have all of next summer, if next summer's weather is suitable for channel crossings, they will go up again. And that will make a complete mockery of his delivery. So I can well understand why Sunak doesn't want to get drawn on either what constitutes a good result or when we might expect that result. But in the absence of any statement from him, he only invites voters to make their own minds up. And they will decide that stop the boats meant, well, the boats would stop. And that the time to make their mind up is when they fill in their ballot paper. And I've said it before, I really don't know what Sunak was doing coming up with these pledges, you know, and saying that the public should judge him on the results, if he didn't actually plan to get those results. No tricks, no ambiguity, judge us on the results we achieve. That's what he said. Why won't he reiterate that now? Why won't he said, oh, in January I said, no tricks, no ambiguities, judge us on the results we achieve, and I still want you to do that. Why won't he just say that now? Not much more than half a year later. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.